So recently, when Sony announced on their blog post about the PlayStation Plus tiers, now it was meant, assumingly, with some positive reaction, some minor criticisms based on the price tags, different prices of the different tiers, and what's offered. It's at least a good thing to me that they're making more of an effort with the digital platforms of using backwards compatibility, bringing older games from older generations back. If there was one reaction that surprised everyone, is that their second handheld, the PS Vita, their gaming library of Vita games, not coming back at all. And I understand that based on the commercial failure of the Vita, I think selling 14 million, something like that. So probably their biggest failure, unfortunately. So one of the issues that some people had is that regarding the PS3, it did come with the caveat of like their PS3 games being played through their cloud streaming service known as PlayStation Now. Now, so understandably, it didn't sit well with everyone wanting to play a lot of those games, download them into their PS5. I get it, requiring a stable internet connection, or for some territories, PlayStation Deluxe as well. So it's sort of the same thing, but for different regions, different countries. And yeah, like it's not exactly shocking. It seems like nowadays more than ever, trying to emulate the PlayStation 3 is difficult. You know, this is like a mistake that I think is haunting Sony for how they build it up and kind of develop their PlayStation 3 architecture system known as the Cell processor when it was revealed in 2005, but was released later in '06. So and the Xbox 360 was out in 2005. And it was meant with a lot of skepticism because of how difficult it is for developers to work on the system and code and program their games, which is why the 360 has always been looked at as the easier system. And look, let me be clear on something. I'm not anti-Sony. I don't have any issue with Sony games, Sony pictures, or anything. I'm just mentioning some of the business decisions at that time. The leadership for SIE, Sony Interactive Entertainment, was completely different that time for PlayStation. Now with Jim Ryan, head of the franchise, head of the organization. Before Jim Ryan, there was Sean Layden, and even before Sean Layden, who put the brand in the right direction from the early mistakes of PS3, there were other people in charge. I think one of them, of course, was Ken Kutaragi, still on board, and there were other people as well that helped with the architecture of the Cell processor for PS3. It was supposed to be really innovative and powerful, and it was, but it was just extremely difficult. And to make things worse, I think like a 20 gigabyte model in 2006 was like $500, and an 80 gigabyte PS3 costed $600. Obviously more expensive than Xbox 360, released 1 year prior in November 2005 as well. So it's just crazy when you think about it in perspective. A PlayStation 3 in 2006 costed $600 in comparison to a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X costing $500. I mean, that's just absurd and kind of atrocious as well. So there were some early mistakes regarding with how Sony, the heads and the CEO kind of handled the PS3. It's a console I like. Now, for what it's worth, I have the super slim model. I know there's like that disc tray. And I know that also, in my opinion, the slim is more aesthetically pleasing. But I'm fine with the super slim for a couple of reasons. How it fits into the entertainment stand, the size, and also how I can easily open the slot, take out the hard drive, and replace it. So that's a good thing for me as well. Since then, like there have been many of the classic major exclusives for the PS3 that have been remastered for the PS4, a console that developers saw as much easier to work with and develop, you know. And unfortunately, regarding the remastering process of games, whether it's Uncharted or especially The Last of Us or Wipeout or God of War 3, just a few examples, it took a lot of time, patience, resources, and seriously, the hard work for them was exhausting. I mean, it would have been more simpler. The job would have been less difficult if instead it was just simply like re-releasing as like a port or updating the game code up to the modern standards as an easier way instead of remastering again and having people buy them. Now, again, like if you buy them again at a much cheaper discount, that's okay. At least it's not like your money's being ripped off. But I mean, like, the best example I can think of, The Last of Us, it got remastered. When it did, it was amazing, perfect, 1080p, 60 FPS, critically acclaimed, one of the best for the PS4. And then when they did the part two towards the end of the generation, and also around since like PS5, sorry, when PS5 came out, updated the game so that it can be ran at 60 FPS, but I think at 1800p or 1440p resolution as seen on the PS4 Pro. So it's good that there's been a much more simpler way for developers on the PS4 system or even on the Xbox One instead of, because they're both new gen, next gen, last gen systems, similar specs, architecture, making it easier for developers to sort of like upgrade the game, of course, through free next gen upgrades or update them to code, better resolution, textures, lighting, shadows, frame rate, all that sort of stuff. There's still the remaster, but now there's just a much easier way instead of making it so exhausting because of the hardware inside is different. Look, I'm not an expert in what is that, how teraflops and gigahertz and CPU and GPU and all that sort of stuff. But just like reading the specs, it's clear how one is improvement over the other. But I mean, like, while I do think the remastering effort is worth it, it would have been much easier if things are different. And it shows Microsoft's commitment now to preserving classics. We've seen now with the Series X and even Series S. I know that the Series S has no disk drive, but even with the Series X, it goes like all 4 generations, not just for the new games. Obviously, Xbox One games. If you're someone that buys an Xbox Series X and you just want to go ahead and buy a bunch of Xbox One games, you're not wrong. It's really the best way to play all these Xbox One games. Much more stable frame rates and much better and cleaner resolutions and all the taking advantage of the extra horsepower. It's much better way. Plus, with the SSD inside, much, much better loading times. Less exhausting loading times. Like less than a minute, or even not even 30 seconds for some games. Like major long open world games taking like a minute and a half and you're just waiting for like what, 30 seconds, 20 seconds, for example, for loading times. So that's a major, major advantage. Why I think it's a smart idea just buying the console and then buying some old games. And of course, even like the Xbox 360 games, a lot of them are major classics and, golden hits as well. And with the One X system, like some of them have been like updated to maybe stable performances, better lighting, just higher resolution. So those games in some ways have been updated to sort of like, they still look like something from 7th gen, but just make them a little bit better in some ways. The graphics look the same, but just better resolution and all that good stuff. So I'm not trying to sound like anti-Sony. I just think some of the decisions made in the past have sort of haunted them, and it's hurting them in a way that when they want to, bring older generation of games forward for nostalgia, the task for them has become more complicated and more difficult than it should be. Whereas Microsoft has found solutions. While not every game from Xbox and Xbox 360, the first 2 consoles, not every single game has been backwards compatible for the newer systems, at least a huge list, and there's a huge library of them, now available. So, of all the console manufacturers, credit goes to Microsoft for making more of the effort. At least, like, I'm glad that Sony made this PS Plus tiers announcement. But it is strange, like, for them, while placing them in different tiers and one costing more and more than the other, the task for them has been really more difficult than it should be. But now they have to live with the consequences of what those before them have done and the mistakes that have been made. Even with the PS Vita, I like the Vita, but even the complaints of the proprietary memory sticks costing a lot of money, I agree with them. They're right. I mean, all those people getting upset at the memory stick costs are right. And that's why I think the Vita sales really hurt them bad. But at least I hope there isn't any sort of anti consumer, arrogant decision making with PS5 going forward. There have been some questionable moments here and there, but at least they've rectified it. Still, it would be ashamed if, in terms of decision making and, business acumen, that Sony goes backwards. It really would be a shame based on the goodwill they've built on the PlayStation 4.